I love Soul Calibur. Between its characters and designs, the animation and martial arts, and its fast and intuitive gameplay, Soul Calibur is one of my all-time favorite fighting game series. I've been long looking for a chance to talk on Design Shop about some of my favorite characters, like Xianghua, or Tira, or Keelik. But unfortunately you took my clickbait, so now I have to talk about Ivy. Before I begin, some disclosure, we are not the kind of channel that is claiming any sort of moral high ground. Our content consists of Magikura unironically reviewing waifu harem anime, us remembering video game plots badly, and then there's me writing editorials about butts. Suffice to say, I am probably not qualified to be talking about things like gender studies in pop culture media. However, I am still critical about character design, and it would be impossible to talk about Ivy in a critical sense without bringing up the topic of sexualization and how it relates to the character. I may be a dank weeb trash lord, but if there's an important topic on the table, I'd like to at least approach it with some level of integrity. With that said, let's talk about Ivy. Isabella Valentine is the adopted daughter of the Valentine family of nobles based in Britain. Her foster father, the late Earl Valentine, had a strange obsession with the legend of the Soul Edge, seeking a key to eternal life, and ironically working himself to death and leaving his bedridden wife, Countess Valentine, without aid, who soon followed him to the grave. Ivy vowed to destroy the Soul Edge, dedicating her time and research to the study of forbidden alchemy. She forged the Ivy Blade, an animated whip sword that she created by unknowingly summoning the power of the Soul Edge itself. She later learns that she is the illegitimate daughter of the dread pirate Cervantes de Leon, the previous wielder of the Soul Edge, and that her destiny was bound to the cursed sword since the day she was born. As one of the most recognizable characters in Soul Calibur history, there are three key elements of Ivy's design: her white hair, her purple dominatrix suit, and her whip sword. To double up on her visual motif, her moves and animations are also designed with dominatrix-type tendencies in mind. She has plenty of moves where she uses her whip to bind and restrain foes while she doles out the punishment. The particular details of Ivy's suit tend to change from game to game, but a few details remain consistent between designs. The most consistent is a rose motif, specifically the Tudor rose, a symbol of her British heritage. Sometimes she'll have skulls, sometimes she'll have snakes, sometimes she'll have all of it at once. Naturally, this imagery contributes to Ivy's status as a series anti-hero. Not entirely evil, but not necessarily on anyone's side either. This can be inferred by her primary color, purple. The series often makes use of a basic color dichotomy, blue representing the Soul Calibur, and therefore good, and red representing the Soul Edge. And while not all characters adhere to this morality palette, it's pretty obvious when they do. With Ivy being purple, she sees herself as standing somewhere in between the two extremes, walking a narrow line between hateful revenge and noble redemption. Now, although the whip sword is a purely fictional weapon and a lot of Ivy's fancier moves are basically magic, it's likely that the moveset was inspired by the Chinese 9-section chain whip. The chain whip is an extremely difficult weapon to learn, and certain martial artists favored the chain whip as either a portable holdout weapon if a sword or spear was unavailable, or as an assassin's weapon because it was collapsible and easy to conceal. The first 3 Soul Calibur games had these weapon demonstrations where characters would perform katas or weapon drills to demonstrate their style. Ivy's weapon demo is actually a chain whip routine, so it's likely that her weapon and style were originally designed before even the character herself. In a 2008 interview, developers at Project Soul revealed that several other concepts were drafted with a chain whip in mind. Among them were a male ninja, a mummy, and a young girl. Turns out that the British Dominatrix Queen was the most popular design, and so Ivy was born. Since then, Ivy has become a series icon and easily one of the most popular characters in the franchise. But there's a persistent design flaw that she's never been able to quite escape from. See, in her backstory, Ivy is supposed to be the sole heiress of a noble house, a woman of status and academia. But in her artwork, she's adventuring around the world in a purple leather thong. This is what we call narrative dissonance, where two elements of a character's identity are in conflict. In this case, the Ivy that's on paper is not the Ivy that's in the game. there's literally no actual context for why she dresses the way she does, other than to provide the Dominatrix image for the whip weapon. Ivy's alternate costumes in Soul Calibur 1 and 2 are actually much more suitable for her identity as a stateswoman, and she honestly still carries that same air of dominance and power while fully dressed from head to toe. Unless the thought of a 16th century woman wearing trousers gets your knickerbockers in a knot. Point is, nothing of the character is lost if you simply give Ivy some more clothes befitting of her actual story, and this has been true of every single alternate costume she's ever had. It's actually easy for a lot of people to miss that Soul Calibur actually has a rather involved story. It's just that until recently, none of it happens in the actual games. But since early fighting games didn't have the luxury of complex story modes to tell the stories of their characters, you could instead infer the evolution and life path of a character through how their designs change throughout each game. Ivy has an especially interesting case of this, because despite her costume completely shattering any semblance of her backstory, her design evolution has taken her story into account step for step. In Soul Calibur 1, Ivy was squarely on the villain side, joining Nightmare's renegade group Svartstrom in search of more soul power for her sword, somehow missing that Nightmare is holding the soul edge itself. Her debut costume therefore takes on a dark purple hue to give her an initial sense of menace. In Soul Calibur 2, Ivy has left Svartstrom, and her crusade to vanquish Soul Edge pushes her to maniacal extremes, killing the innocent and the wicked alike and becoming a dark knight of sorts. Not much has changed in her costume, as she is still in a dark path. In Soul Calibur 3, Ivy learns of the purifying power of the Holy Sword Soul Calibur, realizing that she no longer has to rely on the dark power of Soul Edge to destroy the wicked sword. Ivy's costume is now white to reflect this new path of redemption. In Soul Calibur 4, Ivy realizes that she can't wield the Soul Calibur because the Holy Sword would reject the corrupted blood in her veins. She attempts to apply alchemy to infuse an artificial soul into a homunculus pure enough to wield the caliber, but Cervantes crashes into the lab and mortally wounds her, forcing her to use the artificial soul to continue living on borrowed time. Okay, so I want to talk for a bit about how much I hate this costume. At the very least, her previous costumes had some semblance of actually being a leotard, but this costume is just a bunch of string. There is no more form or structure to the entire outfit, it's just pure chaos and nonsense. Like, no shit, this looks like something Voldo would wear. Now, after rereading the lore, I realized that yes, this represents a moment in Ivy's life where she is battered and broken, so the chaotic asymmetry of the costume probably reflects that, but I am not a fan of this look. And worst of all, she just loses the redemption white for no reason! This costume alone has the worst case of narrative dissonance, and I personally think it's the lowest point in the series in terms of character design. In Soul Calibur 5, Ivy faces Cervantes again, but this time, not only does she actually defeat him, but she reclaims her soul and the rest of his stolen souls from his body, purging all of the Soul Edge influence from him in the process. During the story mode, Ivy acts as a mentor to Patroclus and Pyrrha, sharing her knowledge and studies of the two swords and of the astral chaos. Now, this costume I think is actually the best she's ever had. Not only did she get her redemption white back, but her costume finally adds some elements of noble regalia with the high-collared lapelled tailcoat. All she was missing from her design was some class, and now she finally has it. I think this is the Dominatrix stateswoman she was always meant to be. In Soul Calibur 6, she's pretty much back to her Soul Calibur 1 look, since it's a story reboot. Ivy's design evolution does a decent job of highlighting each landmark in her story as the series progressed, but the problem still remains. The purple Dominatrix suit contradicts the narrative of the character. So the real question boils down to, why the purple Dominatrix suit in the first place? And in terms of fighting game design, I might be able to offer a perspective on it. If you think about her choice of weapon and her fighting style, Ivy's gameplay is all about control. With her whip, she is a threat at any range, and many of her moves are designed to restrict or control an enemy's movement, dragging them to their feet or yanking them in any direction she desires. Dominatrix, of course, is all about control and submission, which is something that Ivy actually does by controlling space and forcing her foe to move where she wants them. Of course, there have been other Dominatrix characters in fighting games before. I mean, one could stretch to make a case for Poison in Street Fighter IV, and how her hard knockdown Rekka setups into meaty fireballs and wake up are kind of like domination and submission. But no one's really looking at Poison's moveset and thinking, oh yeah, baby, hit me with that frame trap. It's in this sense that Ivy is probably the single most successful Dominatrix character in all of fighting games, and it's easy to see why it's made her so iconic. This does not, however, invalidate the narrative dissonance issue, and it's still a huge problem that her costume completely contradicts her story, but it's worth examining why the Dominatrix image might be important to her appeal. There is absolutely space for a Dominatrix character in fighting games, as it fills a particular niche and appeals to a certain power fantasy, but I just want some context. Even though I've long felt that Ivy is a flawed design who is badly impacted by that narrative dissonance thing, there's no denying her impact on the series as a whole. For better or for worse, she is iconic to the franchise, and it would be impossible to think of a Soul Calibur without her. It's clear from Ivy's popularity that perhaps that narrative dissonance isn't actually dragging her down, and that maybe I'm stressing too hard on a negative aspect that ultimately has no long-term effects on the character's image. But actually, it does. With Ivy being so prominent in Soul Calibur's identity, there has been no shortage of exploiting her sexuality to promote the game's image. Ivy is among the most sexualized video game characters in history, and for a long time, Soul Calibur was quickly gaining a reputation as a big-titty anime game, instead of as the fantasy martial arts weapon-based fighter that I wish it would be recognized for. This has eventually led to stuff like that awful Soul Calibur 4 costume that the devs themselves have admitted was pushing too far, and this particular Soul Calibur 5 ad, which I hope someone was fired for. I am by no means saying that Ivy should be reeled back or made less sexual. If we can get designs more like her Soul Calibur 5 design, we might be able to achieve that balance between Lady of Nobility and Dominatrix Queen that she desperately needs. Ivy is memorable for a reason, and it's because she owns the whole Dominatrix scene in all of fighting games. But I do think that sexuality should not dominate the entirety of her character. Ivy has been exploited by people making very bad and very dumb decisions about her image, and while she's far from my favorite character in Soul Calibur, I do think she deserves to be treated with respect, and she definitely deserves better than this. That's it for today's Design Shop. If you like this video and want to share your thoughts about Ivy and Soul Calibur, hit the like button and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to SugarPunch for more anime and game content. Our channel is supported entirely on Patreon, so be sure to check it out for early access or future videos, and to support our ability to make videos featuring British Dominatrix fighters without getting flagged for being inappropriate for advertisers. I'm a.b.i., and I'll see you all on the stage of history.